there's this pattern in industries as they mature, which is they often start with what you would call like basically a strategy that's kind of like being in the middle. So the classic example using this is like retail, retail shopping, where once upon a time there were these things called department stores. So names like Sears and JCPenney, and then you would go to the department store, and the thing about the department store is it would have a pretty good selection of products at a pretty good price. Growing up, that's where we would always go shopping. By the time you hit the 80s and 90s, basically the department stores stopped working, and for the most part they've gone under at this point. And what happened was they got replaced by competitors that were not in the middle, but were on the far end of one side or the other of kind of the spectrum of strategies. That's why we call the outcome of the barbell. And so the department store was replaced by two sets of companies. So first of all, high scale, right? So high scale, Amazon, Walmart. Right, where what you get is like an incredible selection at absolutely fantastic prices, right? But it's a very to your point, like it's a very machine experience. It's a very machine. It's a very it's a high scale. You go to Walmart, like the shelves up to the ceiling and the whole thing, like it's the specific thing. But like that wiped out a huge part of the department stores. And then the other thing on the other side was basically specialist boutiques, where for the thing that you care about the most, whether that's, fashion or jewelry or consumer electronics or candles or whatever, right? Whatever is the thing that you actually care about the most, you go to the boutique, right? And I was talking about it, like you go to the Gucci store, to buy your scarf, you go to the Apple store to buy your iPhone. And what the boutique offers is a very narrow selection at a very high price, but what you're getting is a very specialized experience. And your point, you're often getting the personal touch, right? So you go into you go into like a, wristwatch boutique or something. And it's just like great. It's like, wow, would you like some champagne? We're going to the whole thing. Oh, let me get you a comfortable chair. It's like, here's all the espresso, it's just like the whole thing. Oh, you want to stay late? Great. We'll lock the doors. You can stay for another, half hour and browse through everything. You get this very, kind of personal touch, personal touch kind of experience. And what happened was the department stores just died because they didn't offer either one. They didn't offer scale, and they didn't offer the boutique personal touch experience. And what you find if you look at the history of business is basically as industries professionalize and mature, many of them go through this. And so what I'm describing also happened in advertising agencies. By the way, this is a big theme of the TV show Mad Men, because they were right in the middle of that. I remember there's a certain point in the show where they sell, they're running this kind of mid-size ad agency, and then they actually sell it to McCann, which was one of the big scale players. And then they got frustrated there because it was just a big machine. And so then they went and started their own boutique. And so it was kind of during that era. And then it's ad agencies, it happened with law firms. It happened with Hollywood talent agencies. Michael Ovitz catalyzed this when he was in Hollywood in the 70s and 80s. It happened in it happened in banks. It happened in investment banking, commercial banking. It happened in hedge funds. It happened in private equity. So we just like seen this pattern that this happens over and over again, but it hadn't happened in venture capital. And so when we entered the field, basically what we observed was you just basically have they're all department stores, and the venture capital version of the department store is 6 to 8 general partners with a 300, 400, $500 million fund. Doing the sushi boat strategy, right? Like sitting and waiting, not, by the way, no website, right? Cause like, God forbid that you like, ever tell your story to anybody or make yourself visible. And then you basically sit on Sand Hill Road and you basically wait for the deals to come through. And then, it had run that way for a long time. And so it was kind of this cartel self-referential thing. And so it just kind of ran that way. And basically our bet when we went for scale, and we went to build out the kind of teams that Ben described and sort of this machine that results from it, the bet was basically the death of the middle was going to happen. The barbell was going to play out. And so there was going to be an opportunity for a handful of firms to go for high scale. But only a handful, right? Because what you get on the other side of this is you don't get 50 at high scale. You get a bunch, but like it's not that many. Is a scale economics kick in. And then what would happen on the other side is the rise of the angel investor and the seed investor. And of course, we had been part of that, right? We had been on that side of the barbell. And this was part of the transformation that had happened in venture, which is the original venture firms were like the original venture firms in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they were first money in, right? They were the first check, right? A company like Intel or Apple. By the time the 80s and 90s rolled around, they were no longer the first money in. They were often the second or third check after the angels and the seed investors. And so, we put 2 and 2 together and said, aha, what's going to happen is this field is going to bifurcate just like every other field. We're going to go for scale, and then we're going to encourage the seed investors. And we've been very actively trying to invest in seed investors and trying to help them. And I was trying to be very friendly with them. And then basically the structural questions posed is, what's the point of having a department store, right? Of having a sort of mid-sized firm. And the answer is, by the way, there's no point. Like, for the same reason there's no point to department store. There's no point to the mid-sized firm for the reason that Ben described, which is that, they don't have any, they're not the first money in. They're not at scale, and they don't have any depth. And so at the end of the day, there's really fundamentally no value proposition to the thing if you have access to seed investors on the one side and the scale platforms on the other side. And I would say, 10 or 15 years ago, we would say this and everybody would get mad, because it sounds like we're predicting everybody's going to die. But like, sitting here today, this has really played out. And many of the mid-sized firms that I grew up with are gone. And in some cases they're gone because they failed, but in a lot of cases they're actually gone because they succeeded. The partners made a lot of money, and then at some point, just the rationale for being in business started to fade away, and maybe they had to start working a little bit harder, and that wasn't fun, and so they just kind of folded up shop. And then the LPs correspondingly have adapted to this. And so if you talk to the LPs now, increasingly they are focusing capital either on the scale platforms, or they're focusing capital into this very specific kind of early stage seed angel strategy. And their interest in funding the department store equivalent of the VCs, has really faded. Anyway, so I view this as like this is one of those things. Like, this is a very natural evolution. This was destined to happen. It'll happen in many other industries in the future. It's a somewhat it's a process that plays out in response to customer demand, right? Because the customers of venture firms are the entrepreneurs on the one hand and the LPs on the other hand. And if they both want this change to happen, then it's going to happen. And so it's a very natural process. But, it's disconcerting to be on the wrong side of this. And it's an adaptation process for people to kind of figure out that this is happening. But I think now it's pretty clear.